All right, I guess we can go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to seminar. Just a kind reminder for the registered students for seminar to take the attendance link only for registered students, however. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Professor Fricker to introduce today's speaker.
Well, we have a special treat today, and that is one of our own, Professor Kumares Sinha, as our featured speaker. And when I thought about being the introducer, I started just off the top of my formerly hairy head, all the highlights that I knew about Professor Sinha's career, and there are many. And then I realized the introduction should probably not be longer than the 20-minute time limit for a standard seminar speaker. So what I'm going to do is just go through some of the highlights of an amazing career that Professor Sinha has put together over his time in the transportation profession. When I got to Purdue in 1980, he had already been at Purdue for about 6 years. So working backwards, before Purdue, he was at Marquette University. And before that, he had gotten his master's and PhD degrees at University of Connecticut. And he had gotten his undergraduate degree in India. So anything in transportation you can name, he's done it. He had, I think, an early start in highway engineering, traffic engineering, I should say. He's done a lot of different things in a lot of different areas, and he's reached the pinnacle in just about every respect. He's a member of the National Academy of Engineering. He has, let's see how I'm going from my notes here that I just put together. So that's one of the highlights. Today's talk is going to center on the development and the history of the Transportation Engineering Journal, of which he was editor for many years. On a more personal note, when I got to Purdue in 1980, as I said, he had already been here, and he took me under his wing and gave me some good mentoring. And in about 20 minutes, he said, I remember very clearly, he said, up on the 4th floor, he said, some people that come to Purdue as faculty and they like it, some don't, but you probably meet your wife here. And 6 months later, I did. I met Karen. So he's been my mentor. He's done it not just in words, but in example. He's a good man, but he's also been a good example of how to be an amazing scholar and a wonderful person. So I don't want to take away any more minutes from his talk. So let me introduce Professor Kumares Sinha. One other comment I want to make is that recently some other universities have tried to borrow him, because just having him on your campus is an amazing feather in one's cap. So several universities have borrowed him, and we were lucky to have him come back to Purdue. So let me finally introduce Professor Kumares Sinha.
Hey, thank you, John. No, most of those things I could tell about Professor Fricker. I'm thoroughly indebted to him. Most importantly, he's my moral compass. All these last 40 years, what is right, what is wrong, for many things that Professor Fricker has guided me. In fact, this material I'm going to show today or going through, I asked him, he was the first person to read the manuscript. So I thank you, John, for all these years, and you have enhanced my life. I'm going to talk about a paper I wrote. Chris Hendrickson from Carnegie Mellon few years ago asked me if I would write a history of the Journal of Transportation Engineering. And I said, okay, I've been involved for some time, I will do. Then as usual, it takes time. It took a lot of effort to collect data. Initially, we started with a big ambition, but turned out it was a hard job to get starting from day one. I said 150-year legacy, and I'll show you how it is 150 years, you may have wondered. So Abdullah is going to show the slides, because I still haven't learned the trick of sharing content or screen. So Abdullah. Okay, ASCE was established in New York City, 1852. Then it was like that, and mostly meetings, annual meetings and periodic meetings in New York area, and engineers there. And they used to have publication started 1872. It's really proceedings and transactions. That's what they used to have. I'll talk about that. But the divisions, the way we had for a long time, it took about 70 years. 1922, highway division was one of the very first ones to be established. Then 1945, air transport, 1956, pipeline, 1971, urban transportation, and that's the year I got involved with ASCE and urban transportation. And in 2004, all of them were combined into transportation and urban planning and development under the institute. The reason I'm mentioning this because the journals in ASCE more or less follow the divisional boundaries. That's the way it was for a long time. Next slide. Okay. The archival publications in ASCE started 1872, and that's the transactions. And there the papers presented at annual meetings, then eventually also periodic meetings or any other meetings, anybody presented, the published papers would get published into the final papers will be published in transactions. And 1872, then proceedings, there's some overlap. That was more draft of papers of announced meetings, and then discussions by the people who attended, and those who could not attend the meetings, they could read the draft paper and add correspondence, oh, you should have added this, you should have taken this, and those are correspondences. And those all will be published then ultimately in transaction. And then journals, individual journals, up until like this, 1956, it was transactions and proceedings. 1956, the transaction stopped. Proceedings discontinued, and the journals took over, and transactions ended in 1957 or 58 to give, because the annual, they used to publish annual papers, annual meeting, so you have to give extra year. So that's the way the archival publications took place. Next slide. Now, very interesting, you learn something new. We call volumes. So JTE, Journal of Transportation and Engineering, in 2020 was 146th volume. So we assume that's exactly 146 years. And that's the way it is. And all journals go year by year, and each year is a volume. But there are some inconsistencies in the early volumes in proceedings and transactions, because the early days volume numbers depended on number of bound volumes to be archived. So that's the picture of the bookshelf that's the best Abdullah could find to give you the idea. It was whole is archival, is to be put in a bound volume. So how many you could have in 1 year, and that's the way the volume numbers were. So some years there are 2 volume numbers. That doesn't happen now. All journal, if I take the Journal of Transportation Engineering and 146, 147 will be 2021, 148 will be 2022. So that's the way. All journals from this beginning, like Journal of Highway Division 1922, it was the 89th volume. They picked up from the proceedings, up until then, 88 up was proceedings and transactions, and so we started. Next slide. Next one. Okay, I'll have to go a little quick. I have 24 slides, but I want to go to the back because that's what I have, some of my, what we learned. Okay, initially there was no editor or there was secretary of the society is to serve as the editor under a publication committee. And we conjectured that that's the way the right-hand corner, the upper corner, that the people in the boardroom, ancient looking people, 100 years from now, the people, if they see our pictures, they will call ancient. I'm almost becoming ancient. So that's the way perhaps the publication committee met. However, the journal had a publication committee of its own, individually divisional, and then they served as the editorial board. In 1969, we had Transportation Engineering Journal, all the multiple divisions, and they came from two management groups, B and C, they're combined. This was the unique, only journal in ASCE was like that, multiple divisions, highway, air transport, aerospace, etc. And they came from two management groups. So it's a very fragmented administration or coordination. 1983, Transportation Engineering Journal of ASCE became Journal of Transportation Engineering. And it has the name change is accidental, and also I don't know accidental or not, but consequential, and also my involvement. I was already involved in the Transportation Engineering Journal as a representative of our executive committee liaison from the urban transportation. And then somebody from ASCE higher up came and told that we were going to change the title into Transportation and Pipeline Engineering of ASCE. And that made me really very concerned. They said that the pipeline doesn't get any exposure, so we want to highlight. So that was fine. I think pipeline is the important aspect of transportation component, but highlight pipeline as opposed to highway or urban or railroad or whatever air, that's not fair. So there was a big campaign, and I won't go to all the gaudy details. A lot of effort needed, but we did change ASCE to the staff, so it became just Transportation Engineering Journal. Became, that's not ASCE, we dropped that, JTE. And then initially editorial board included individual publication committee chairs as editors, and all the reviewing everything is to be done by individual divisions. I came in, I served as the de facto editor-in-chief because I was representing both highway and urban transportation divisions at the journal. So 1988, I was made editor-in-chief. That was the first time any editor-in-chief in a journal that started ASCE. By the way, by vote of all the other editors, I did not self-declared the leader, but it was done democratic process. In 2000, the editorial board, we discontinued the editorial board by divisions, by mode, highway, air transport, like that. Instead, we made it functional, planning, design, that kind of modeling. Then we added Asia and Europe regions. We expanded the editorial board because they're getting a lot of papers from China and from Europe. So we added Fua from Asia and Kiran Figan from Europe became part of the editorial board. And then by the time 2007, end of 2007, I gave up the task of editor-in-chief and gave it to Chris Hendrickson. And 2017, JT was split into two parts, systems and pavements, and it's all under Transportation and Development Institute, which came in 2004. And TNDI also has two other journals, Journal of Infrastructure Systems and Journal of Urban Planning and Development. So next slide, please. And this is the picture, the timeline and the evolution of the transportation related journals. From the left-hand side, transactions from 1872 to 1963, we had that, and then proceedings 1896 to 1956. And I already said why transactions, because needed few years to get the papers published that were presented in annual meetings previous years. Then in 1956, the Journal of the Highway Division, it continued till 1968. Pipeline between 57 and 68, because 69 we started Transportation Engineering Journal of ASCE, and Air Transport Division started at 56, and 61 it stopped because it became Journal of Air Transport, something, Journal of Aerospace Transport Division, and that for a few years, 4 years. All of were combined into Transportation Journal of ASCE, and that went on 1969 to 1982. And then I explained to you at the end of 1982, ASCE wanted to make it Pipeline Engineering and Transportation together, journal title, and we revolted and then became Journal of Transportation Engineering in 1983, and it continued till 2016. It still continues, but we have made two parts. Aerospace split out in 1988, and soon after, 5 years, and then Pipeline 2010, and that's the way we have now. So Transportation Engineering Journal, the way we have now, it has three areas we started with, is the highway, air transport, and urban transportation division. And 1971, it became a division. It was a council. Okay, next slide, please. Now, I will quickly talk about the technical contents. It's fascinating. We read these papers. Now, I could not read all of the thousands of papers. I took samples, every other year, or random samples I made. So first few years, 50 years or so, I took 613 papers randomly selected. And mostly the papers early days were design and construction of facilities like a canal or railroad. That was the, and mostly reports and case studies, often without formal citations or references. So in the sample I mentioned, which included everything, construction, geotech, all aspects of civil engineering, 26% involved transportation. So you see how important transportation has been in civil engineering profession. And they included railroads, canals, and ports, mainly. Roads appeared in early 1900s. Next slide. And railroad papers, along railroad papers, they're all, again, alignments, costs, comparative economy of light and heavy rail, which is important, and light rails for urban areas. Then railroad surveys, tie renewals, inclines, elevated railroads, very technical aspects. Electrification of suburban railroads. Lafayette, Indiana, Lafayette, West Lafayette had a rail line, street cars or street rails or whatever they call those tram lines. And also we had, that was intra-urban, inter-urban, Chicago, Lafayette, we also had rail lines. Then electrification of suburban railroads, there are some papers, underground railways, terminals, station design, federal ownership of railroads, there are some papers, performance of railroads during World War One, lots of war efforts. Things used to be transported by rail at the time. Then I thought interesting efficiencies in the use of railways for freight transportation. A paper in 1892, the rail transportation as opposed to canals. Those of you who are history buffs, you know the Erie Canal went out of business because of railroads. Okay, next slide. Water transportation, it was then and even now Mississippi River is our main water line, inland water transportation. So threats to navigation, Mississippi River and reclamation is still going on hundreds of years. Improvements of entrances to ports and harbors, how to do that, the weather effects. Economic depths of canals of large traffic. You saw what happened to well, it's not the economic depth, it's wind. In Suez Canal, the big barge got, or ship got stuck. It's open now. After alternative lines of for Nicaragua Canal, Panama Canal, Cape Cod, and other canals, there are a lot of feasibility papers, etc. we found. An interesting thing I found that the first example of ecological content, role of forests and reservoirs on the navigability of rivers. And that's, the sedimentation, how the effect of that, and the forest and reservoirs can do that, the effect on navigability. Next slide. And roads and highways, as I said, appeared towards the end of 19th century. There are only 10 papers between 1875 and 1922. Only 10 papers in my sample, 600. So I cannot tell the population, but out of 613, only 10 papers on roads and highways. The first paper I saw on roads in my database was on disputed points in road building. A lot of right-of-way issues, the contracting issues, those kind of things. Most roads-related papers are between 1915 and 1922. That's the period in this country we had the good roads movement, the counties. There's lots of interesting stories are there about that. Well, anyway, I don't want to get sidetracked. I was going to tell some stories. Topics included materials, construction methods, maintenance, and contracting procedures. The drainage was the biggest problem. It still is. Use of sand and clay mixtures in road surfacing. Like macadam roads. Macadam roads are not sand and clay mixtures, but like that. Experiences with asphalt and concrete is still going on, even today, 100 years, issue of asphalt and concrete. The need for all-weather roads became a national priority during the early decades of the 20th century, as I said. And next slide, please. Then urban transportation appeared, in this country, the ASCE, as a technical division in 1971. I want to mention Frank Turner, who is the father of interstate in this country. Whenever we talk about Frank Turner, people say, oh, the highwayman. But Frank Turner was one of the people who felt the need for urban transportation. And he was a member of the executive committee of the Technical Council on Urban Transportation, ASCE. I want to point out, and we give an award, very prestigious award, Turner Lecture, ASCE, which is our Terzaghi lecture. And I was part of that, starting that between Highway Division and Urban Transportation. Jointly, we did that. Now the Institute does that. And in memory of Frank Turner, and I felt he contributed in urban transportation. So coming back, In early days, streetcars, street traffic, in New York City between 1805 and 1904, like we do look back and forecast some of the beginning of that. Vertical passenger transportation, elevators. In 1909, there was a paper. Then rail transit dominated both the inter and intra-urban passenger transportation all the way through World War II. Then transit ridership in general started to decline with massive suburbanization and attendant highway construction programs. It's a history that post-World War II. And the topics of papers closely followed the changing landscape of transportation needs. Next slide, please. So Journal of the Highway Division between 56 and 68, and a lot of things are happening by this time. Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 revolutionized the big thing, big public projects, interstate highways that was happening. US DOT became US DOT in 1967. Before that, federal aspects of highways or roads is to be run by BPR. BPR had its beginning in 1893, Office of Road Inquiry. It became part of the Department of Interior and continued. I want to mention BPR because we owe a lot to BPR people in transportation, highways, also urban transportation. Even today, the assignment we do, BPR formula. Did you ask question where the BPR came from? That's this, Bureau of Public Roads. So BPR delay function. We still use BPR delay function. So they worked on all these things, not just roads, but also urban transportation. Then Highway Act of 1962, often we forget, that's the major thing happened in the history, in our country's history, the transportation, urban transportation, because that's where the first time, not just highways, the multimodal 3C, we call continuous, comprehensive, and coordinated planning of transportation, highway and other together. And those of your students listening to me, that's the beginning of the multimodal planning, transportation planning. Then ASHO road test took place in early 60s. And ASHO road test, again, completely changed way we design our pavements. And we still follow ASHO road test, even though Sharp One has come up with mechanistic empirical methods. Then, although not within that period of highway division, but the work was going on in environmental aspects, a lot of things are happening up until, not up until 1970 and onwards. There are a lot of federal legislation and National Environmental Policy Act of 1970 revolutionized the way we do public projects, not just highways, but any public projects. Next slide, please. Okay, Transportation Engineering Journal of ASCE between 69 and 82, all papers in transportation area in one forum. It started with highway, air transportation, pipeline, and aerospace. I already told you how aerospace went out and then pipeline eventually. So it was quarterly instead of, before that, some of the journals like air transport and aerospace used to be irregular. Periodically they used to publish 2 or 3 per year. And now we became quarterly, all of them together when we became one journal. And there, if you look at the papers that I flipped through, urban and statewide transportation planning becoming big at the time, BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit, lots of papers on that, and vertical and short takeoff and landing of air transportation was a big item at that time, I remember. Role of private sector in public transportation, federal and state transport investments in transit, public takeovers, traffic operations, and also road safety became very important those period. And then towards the end of that period started, or around towards the end of 70s, freeway revolts in San Francisco, in Cleveland, a lot of places, eventually in Milwaukee. Social considerations are coming up, and all the people asking questions. The interstate was really a way of doing surgery, taking the downtown areas where all the slums, etc., used to be, and cleaning slum clearance programs, basically getting rid of poor people and a lot of minority, etc. A lot of issues, social issues came up, which I must tell you, the highway engineers did not do that in a nefarious, in a mischievous way, but it happened like that, and unintended consequences. So changing public attitudes, air pollution, and other concerns started around that time. And there are papers. Then Journal of Transportation Engineering, as the title is now, started in '83 and continues. And I already mentioned the proposed change. It became bi-monthly and soon became monthly, and is still monthly now. And we needed the reforms. When I got, as I said, I was already involved in publications, but didn't pay much attention. When I got involved in stopping the title, I realized that it's very fragmented responsibility of publications. And there is very little or none lack of coordination among divisions in publication process. They're all silos just put together. So we changed. A lot of changes took place and a lot of difficulty, but we did. We took. I'm glad that we persisted. So I forget how many papers. Again, I took a database and I saw about 20% of papers on highway and airport pavements, and 16% on traffic operations, freeway route guidance, network modeling. Those things are becoming very important. Signal controls, 14% papers on pipelines, about 10-11% planning and economics, 9% on highway geometric design, and safety, 6% on urban transit, 4% on air transportation. Railroads, we never had a railroad division in ASCE, and so we felt that it is important item. So we still continue the railroad papers, although some of the papers I don't think we should, but I'll come to that later. And the rest were environment, energy, and other related issues, which are becoming more and more important in transportation area. And there was a paper on 4-year experiment. Oh, this is our tooting our own horn. There was a paper of a 4-year experiment in shared use of automobiles that took place at Purdue. It appeared in January '87. This was, by the way, the first experiment in shared use of resources, not shared mobility, but shared use of resources, like a co-op, or we call it mobility enterprise. It's a fascinating idea. It never caught on, but will eventually. And that's the first time it ever happened at Purdue. And I saw a lot of papers refer to this as those are real scholars on shared mobility will find. Unfortunately, the title was not correct, was not well done, but that's what it is. It appeared in '87, and '89 February, a paper was written by several of us on this new technologies, emerging information communication technologies in all aspects of transportation. And I take pride to say that that paper became prelude to the first international conference on the is before Intelligent Transport Society of America. As a matter of fact, that thing was conceived or talked about at the conclusion of that conference in California, February '89, in cooperation with Caltrans. And many, many papers followed in the wake of that conference in the journal in all areas of technology. Next slide, please. Then a continuation, In the past few decades, there are papers on machine learning, computer-based routing, scheduling, transit system, emergency response, evacuation systems, multi-message fiber optic lane control signs, etc. Use of robots, lots of papers on use of robots in maintenance and inspection, dynamic and online traffic assignment, and so on. And JTE published those papers. Now, I must point out, civil engineers are still responsible for planning, design, construction, and operation of transportation systems as they were 100 years ago. They continue to be responsible. However, technologies for accomplishing these tasks have changed. And the journal shows that how we have evolved. And as I said, JTE has been at the forefront of highlighting these changes. We always don't get any credit. The ASCE doesn't get credit for ushering in the technologies, but we are. Well, next slide, please. So 1991, journal best papers, we started to give journal best papers. I give credit to Chris Hendrickson. He was the managing editor. He suggested to me that we should start best paper award or best paper awards. There's no cash involved in it, a certificate, but it's an honor. So between 1991 and 2010, around 20 years, there are 19 best papers. And 3 of them on airport design, 5 on pavement, 6 on highway design, traffic operation, planning, etc. And the other, between 2011 and 2018, there are 11 best papers around 11 years. 3 on traffic operations, 2 on geometrics, 2 on pavement maintenance, non-motorized traffic papers got recognized, and 2 on project risk and uncertainty and use of genetic algorithm in transit design. Now I must tell you, I looked at all those papers and I found the central theme or the thread is the practical issue. All those papers were practical problems. So selection was not based on the elegance of analytics, but on how the analytics were used to solve or improve current practice. That's the mantra, that's the idea. We must always remember, our journal is not the new ways of simulation or new optimization technique. Ours is to use those to solve a practical problem. And that's the way journal should continue. Next slide. Now, accepted rates, usefulness, and quality. During 1992-98, there are about 1,000 papers submitted. 492 were published, and during 2012 and 2019, that period, the corresponding numbers were almost 4,000, 4 times, and published at 851. Impact factor increased from 0.154 in 97 to 1.486 in 2018. I want to say something about impact factor. We never paid attention to the impact factor or citations because we feel our motivation is to serve membership. So if a paper comes, it's nothing wrong with the paper we publish. We never think, will it get a lot of other papers will be generated or not? We never think, because we feel our platform, our forum is to provide as wide an opportunity as we can give to our members or readers or whatever. So that's why our motivation has never been to game the system to increase the impact factor. However, last 20 years, I've been seeing this unbelievable craziness about impact factor and citations. So journals start 5 years ago, and then now they have impact factor of 10. How do they do? Well, you can do those. But if your If your motivation is to impact factor and the commercial interest, then you can do. But your motivation to serve society and membership, then it is not possible. So anyway, so that idea, and again, why we are so crazy about impact factor, why? Because about 70s, 80s, or if continuing last 50 years, there is a huge expansion of engineering, of course, or the whole university systems in the country, but along with that, the engineering and transportation. When I started more than 50 years ago, there may be one person in a university or two, if at all. And that I used to at Marquette, I used to teach everything: materials, geometric design, bituminous, concrete, everything, general practitioner. But now we have specialized. We have transportation area pretty well established in civil engineering programs in the country. And academic world, transportation has taken hold. And now, how do you give credit or career advancement in academic field? Is the paper. That's a performance measure. Because we are all university systems undergoing, we have followed the science world. In science, yes, citation is important. But in engineering, not just the more papers generation or the more research. Ours is product development. We build things, we do things. So ours is how we use the scientific knowledge to create things. So, but how do we measure that? That's a difficult. So easy thing is to chase citations, and that's a mistake. Impact, not just citations. Impact, it's what to do with the knowledge to get things better. So that's I like to keep that motivation in our journal, the idea. Okay, I'm getting agitated. Okay, so in the first half of 2020, we have, one way some people say that maybe instead of citations, we should look at downloads. Maybe. So full text downloads exceeded in the only the 6 months, first half of 2020, JT full text downloads exceeded 64,000 without considering Part B. Part B came in 2017, so a couple of years we did not take them. If abstracts are included in downloads, numbers become as high as more than 5 times. So I think that we may not be getting enough citations or impact factor accordingly in relation to the number of papers published, but people are looking at it. That's what we want, people to look, and maybe they're using, but they're not writing another research paper to publish. So that's the difference. Keep that in mind, those of you who are students listening to me. We also did a reader survey a couple of times, and that indicated that readability is an important factor in the usefulness of journal content. And I often used to get criticism from Hart Levinson, all the practitioners. What is going on in the journal? We cannot read. We don't understand what's going on. And they're all esoteric formulas and simulations, optimizing, all this. People are showing off, that their ability to, like one guy said, it looks like solutions looking for problems, but we want to the other way around, problems looking for solutions. Okay, next slide, please.
I'm just going to kindly remind you of I'm just going to kindly remind you of a little less than 7 minutes left.
What did you say?
So I'm just reminding you of the time left. We have about 7 minutes left on.
Okay, let's do it fast. Let's go. Okay, so what does the history tell us? I will, instead of going through point by point, I'll tell you quickly that several changes. First of all, in a given period, topics reflect prevailing technical issues, societal context, and available technologies. That's understood. is a common sense. Initially, our purpose, journal or archival item, is to be exchange of information among practicing engineers. Then came the emphasis has shifted now to theoretical concepts, mathematical modeling, statistics. That's what I was telling. The scope has changed from practice to mostly a platform for disseminating research results. You know why? Again, because initially practitioners used to be involved in journal, in ASCE activities, but now academics, they're invasive species. They have crowded out all the practitioners. They feel they have no room in the journal or mostly in journals. So there is nobody in the journal are practitioners, or mostly they're all of them are academics. Let's go to the next slide. And readers, you know, there was a time when each issue will have 30 or more discussions and correspondences. Readers who used to read, they're actively involved with the paper. But now we rarely get any discussion, and minimal, if non-existent. You know why? Most readers are now academic researchers, and effort needed to prepare a discussion may not be justified in terms of the credit one receives for authoring one. You know, promotion and tenure time, a discussion of, so you better write a paper in the meantime. So these are the all together, this, you know, it's nothing again mischievous, but that's the way it is. You know, if you want to academic world, everything is run by the academic world, and the motivation in academic world is a career advancement, and one way to show your performance is number of papers, citations. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So role of practitioners have gone down, and that's a more or less same thing pointed out. How old days I saw people involved, cities, counties, state highway departments, the authors were from BPR, Army Corps of Engineers. Now they're all universities now. Next slide, please. So here during the pandemic, I read a couple of books that I wanted to read, long tomes. One of them was War and Peace. So there I saw the Napoleon's invasion of Russia, the battle plans that are being prepared against the invasion of Napoleon by generals with brilliant theories of battles, and generals who have experience in the field. Of course, you know who had really the important role or relevant information of the people who are in the field. So theory is important, but practicality is vital. So to serve the profession, journal should be useful to both researchers. We do need the research scientists. We need new ideas, new techniques, but practice should be kept in mind. So we need an effort to bring back the practice community in all aspects of the journal: writing, reviewing, and editing. Next slide. So editorial board has become geographically diverse, which is good. Over the years, with the reviewers and also from around the world, however, very little gender diversity and no URM. And I found in part A only one female, that Nadia Gritza, and all of them are all male. And part B, all academics, and I couldn't find any female. So editorial board members should be drawn from reviewers. I think that we should go to the reviewers and who can add to the diversity. And I want to point out, reviewers are the key. Reviewers are the worker bees and absolutely essential to the quality of the journal. Next slide, please. Okay, I think we need a new focus, we need a focus a new journal on CAT, Connected and Automated Transportation. And I must tell you that this should be civil engineering aspects. And we remain an important part of this development, and we should highlight that. To do that, to provide a platform, we need a place, and we need a new part. And I must tell you, the work is going on, has advanced quite a bit, and effort being made to include a part in JTE, Part C. Next slide, please. So this is my final remarks. JTE has a rich history, over 150 years. Remember that. It's not the impact factor, it's the usefulness. It is a premier transportation journal published by ASCE and meant to serve civil engineering community. It has the respect of the broad academic community in the US and abroad. Its sphere of involvement has changed over a century and a half and continues to change, and it will change and continues to change with massive changes in technology as well as in societal context. You know, coming few years, you'll be writing the effect of pandemic in transportation planning, transportation system. The commuter-oriented transportation planning that we do today is maybe passé, because there will be a lot of people who will be working from home. They're not going to go back to the office unless they're forced to. So I conclude by remembering what Tolstoy said in War and Peace in the context of the war plans, battle plans. A battle plan cannot be drawn only by theory, but must be made to address the reality of the field. Even in CAT, we need experiments. We need actual data, field data, and those papers will be lasting, will make lasting contribution. Okay, I stop here, Abdullah. Oh, there are some acknowledgements I want to give. ASCE publication office staff. I remember Nina Kramer, years gone by, and Steve Hanfleet, she helped me to get the data. And also over the years, fellow ASCE volunteers. There are many, few of them come to my mind. Marty Lipinski, Mike Demetsky, Ray Moore, Chris Hendrickson, Larry Rillette, and Purdue associate, I mentioned Professor Fricker. He read the first draft and made comments and made some changes in the text. And Bismarck Agbeli, who used to be at Purdue, he did a lot of work. You know, I asked him time to time to look up a paper from 18 something, and he did. And Abdullah helped me, he still helps me in technical aspects, so a big help. And that's the reference. It has online, this paper is there, and it will be in printed version in June issue, I guess. So thank you very much, and hope you learned something.
Thank you, Professor Sinha. With that, we will open the floor for questions. We understand that some students might have classes or other commitments, so we understand those that needing to leave. But if anyone has questions, you can go ahead right now and raise your hand to ask your question. All right, we do have one from Rajat. Rajat, you can go ahead and unmute.
Great presentation, Dr. Sinha. One of the most intriguing things that I gathered from your presentation was that we probably don't focus a lot on railroads. And I was wondering, Purdue being an elite university in this regard, I don't see any course related to railroad, at least named after railroads. And I haven't seen many people, even at DRB, talking about railroads. And I know there are a lot of reasons behind this, but can Purdue not take an initiative in this regard?
Yeah. Well, Professor Fricker has been with me for a long time together. We tried, we used to have, maybe 20 years ago, Professor Satterley was the last person who taught railroads engineering in our program. but we discontinued because there are not too many jobs in railroads. I remember there was a young woman, she went to work for Chicago transit system. So she was doing their signals. Your student, John, I forget her name. We used to have few people who went to railroad maintenance area, but there is not much in railroad area that job opportunity. But you have a point that railroad should be given the planning and economics, etc. You know why? Railroad is a private sector operation. It's not a public, and they take some people and mostly mental. Maybe the day will come with the high-speed rail, etc. Will open up the opportunity. I have a lot of information. We looked into the papers that we published in ASCE. I questioned whether we should continue or not, and but we did investigation. We investigated. We found that the citations or the citations and downloads railroad papers were not as bad as or not as little or as we thought. Quite a few papers are downloaded on railroad areas, but we should not perhaps publish the papers the structural aspects of rail bed, etc., and maybe more on systems area. But anyway, you didn't ask at that question. You asked about railroad in the curriculum. University of Illinois, they have a railroad program, but you know, we are boiler makers. We started railroad was a big thing at Purdue, but it has lost luster, I guess.
If I may add to that, may I add to that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, Professor Sinha. So about the railroad, Professor Garrett John instructors, he's teaching a course in railroad design, and I've been talking with him over the past 2 years of whether we can expand this to include faculty in transportation and faculty in materials. So that's what's going on with the railroad sector. So hopefully.
But
yes.
That's mostly on structural aspects, right?
Yes, that's right. Yes, that's right. So the idea was to expand it to include the transportation part of railroad management and also the materials part of it. So our vision was something was across three departments, three divisions of civil engineering, to handle the different aspects of railroad. Sure. And we have a student called Omeka Bose who is working for, I think, CSX. She's doing very well, and I think she was Professor Africa student.
Okay, yeah.
Omeka, yes, she's working in the railroad industry, and
yes, that's the person I'm talking about.
Okay, all right.
Any other question, or do you have time?
We have it open. It doesn't seem like we have any more questions. So with that, we can conclude by thanking you, Professor Sinha, for taking us over the lifespan of the American Society of Civil Engineers focus on transportation in terms of publications and documenting work. So thank you again, Dr. Sinha. Thank you to the audience from both inside and outside our school. And with that, we conclude our seminar for today.
Thank you. Take care. Okay, bye-bye.
On the left.